I'll be reading from Matthew 12:46 through 50. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you." He replied to him, "Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother."
In setting the stage for the text that David just shared with us in that reading, we know that Jesus has long been, at this point, established in his ministry, his public ministry, which Luke tells us he began when he was about 30 years old. And he was particularly becoming noted for two things. One was authority and one was power. The authority with which he spoke. In particular, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew wraps that up by saying that when Jesus had finished all these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes. There was something distinctly different about what they heard from Jesus. It flew in the face of conventional wisdom. It flew in the face of traditional rabbinic teaching. And when it says that Jesus spoke with authority, that's not in the sense of someone barking orders at other people or heavy-handedly imposing burdensome traditions on someone else. That's what the scribes and the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, were quite skilled at. That's what they were quite adept at. That's what the people were used to hearing from them in a very, very burdensome way. But I think when it says that Jesus taught them with authority and they recognized that, it's in the sense that there was just an unquestionable rightness in his words. There was a palpable credibility in what he taught. His words were infused with genuine, believable, passionate, incontrovertible truth. When Jesus said it, it just sounded true. It made sense. Even when it stung, it made sense. When the words of Jesus struck some raw moral nerve within you, even though it hurt, you knew it was right. There was righteousness in it, there was justice in it, and there was mercy in it. It just tasted like truth when Jesus taught. So he was recognized for the authority with which he spoke, recognized for the power that he demonstrated, the divine power by which he healed the sick, by which he cast out demons. That's what has impressed Nicodemus. I don't know if Nicodemus had ever personally seen any of the mighty works of Jesus up to this point, but he had certainly heard about them. So when he comes to Jesus at night, he says, "Rabbi, we know that you've come from God as a teacher, for no one can do these things unless God is with him." Authority and power were hallmarks of Jesus' ministry. But it's not that he found adoring crowds and enthusiastic crowds everywhere. Some places were harder. The toughest crowd was in his hometown. The toughest crowd was in Nazareth, where he had grown up not just as the carpenter's son, but where he had grown up as the carpenter, how he had been known his entire life, from childhood up until the age of 30. And so there's a significant skepticism and disbelief in Jesus in Nazareth, resulting in the fact that Jesus didn't perform many miracles there, not from a lack of power, but because of a lack of faith, a lack of trust. People weren't coming to him to be healed. They didn't believe that he had the power. So Jesus is going to say, a prophet has honor just about everywhere, except in his own hometown, among his own relatives, and even in his own household. And it's his own household that figures into that text that David read a moment ago. At the time of that text, Jesus' own earthly family felt that way. They had serious doubts about his claims, serious concerns about their loved one, and they were thinking many things about him. Honor was not at the top of that list at that time. A parallel passage to the text that David read from Matthew 12 is found in Mark chapter 3. It says in Mark 3:21, when his own people heard of this, they went out to take custody of him, for they were saying, he has lost his senses. He is out of his mind. And if you wonder how specific his own people is, he's going to define that for us. Mark is a little further down in verse 12 of Mark 3, when he says that it was his mother and his brothers that came to him, Mary and Jesus's brothers. And it may stand out to you that there's a missing person here. Joseph isn't mentioned in that text. Again, we're assuming that sometime between the time that Jesus was 12 years old, and we read in that account in Luke about the family's trip to Jerusalem at the time of the Passover, sometime between then and the adulthood of Jesus and the onset of his ministry, Joseph has died. But we know that Mary and Joseph had children together. 4 sons, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. Sisters are mentioned, so that there are at least 2. So we have a minimum of at least 6 siblings, earthly siblings, half-siblings of Jesus. And by the time Jesus begins his public ministry, the oldest of those siblings would have been in their mid to late 20s. Others of them would have been in their mid to late teens. That time in life, when you know everything, including the fact that your brother has lost his senses, including the fact that your oldest brother has lost his mind. John 7:5 is going to spell it out even more specifically than that even his own brothers weren't believing in him. And from a human standpoint, that's got to be troubling. I don't think Jesus suffers from a lack of confidence. He knows who he is, he knows why he's here, but the fact that his own brothers at this point don't believe in him can't have escaped his notice. So when Jesus is told in this text in Matthew chapter 12 and the parallel in Mark chapter 3, a teacher, your mom, your brothers are outside, they want to see you. They want to talk to you. Jesus asks the question, who is my mother and who are my brothers? I don't know for a fact, but I'm just assuming there's a dramatic pause after Jesus asks those questions. Who is my mother and who are my brothers? Just to sort of feed the supposition that maybe he has lost his senses. What do you mean he doesn't know who his mother is? Doesn't know who his brothers are? In no way is he disrespecting or disparaging or disregarding or insulting his physical family. Jesus, of all people, knew the commandment, honor your mother and your father. He had written it. He had revealed it as Yahweh, the God of Israel. He's going to give the Pharisees a verbal scourging in Matthew chapter 15 for their upholding of their traditions at the expense of that commandment. Jesus is charged by them for violating the traditions of the elders. He says, that's not much of a problem. Why do you transgress? Why do you violate? Why do you disobey God's law in order to keep your traditions? They had found a loophole. They had decided there's a way by which we can earmark our money, dedicate it to God, call it Corban, keep it in my own account, but I can't help my aging parents with it. He says you're destroying God's law to keep your traditions. Jesus is going to see to the ongoing care of his mother Mary when he is on the cross, speaking to the Apostle John, behold your mother, and to his mother, behold your son. He isn't disparaging or discounting the importance of his physical family. He just realizes this is a teaching moment and I can't let it pass. So after he asks those 2 questions, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? He points to the disciples. And maybe he's still silent at this point. Maybe he just points for a while and makes eye contact with Peter and with Simon and with Matthew and Bartholomew and other disciples who may have been there. And he said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Took the opportunity to reveal that there's a place where I belong, there's a family of which I am a part that is deeper and stronger and more lasting than flesh and blood and physical families. And in doing so, Jesus blesses us. In doing so, Jesus honors us. That he would describe us as his family and describe his body as the place where we most truly belong. I love Hebrews for a whole lot of reasons. I know several of you enjoy teaching from the book of Hebrews. And just a great passage here in Hebrews chapter 2, beginning in verse 10. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy, that is Jesus, and those who are made holy, that is us, both are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. And then the writer quotes from Psalm 22, verse 22. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises. Those of us who have been born again by water and the Spirit through the blood of Jesus Christ are family. We're siblings because we've been born of the same Father through the one who makes us new. And it doesn't take much to cause us to lose sight of that, to lose our focus on that. We can so easily take for granted what God has provided for us in giving us such a wonderful place to belong. That fills such a great need for us and desire for us throughout our lives. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, doesn't matter what demographic you fall into. That desire to belong, need to belong, are a desire and a need that I think has remained unchanged in humankind since the creation. Many things in this world change, many things do not. I don't have to convince you that things change in life. So many things have changed within your lifetime, and I'm not just talking to the oldest among us, I'm talking to some of the youngest among us, that you've seen amazing changes just in your lifetime. We'll ask for a show of hands here. How many of you right this moment are using an electronic Bible rather than a printed Bible? Nice and high where I can see your hands. That's a lot of you. How many of you had read the bulletin electronically before arriving this morning and get a printed copy? That's significant. That's significant. Fewer of you are reading it during the sermon than you used to, because you may read it a second time, but you more or less know what it's going to say by the time you're reading it right now. And you get that blessing, that preview. Wonderful change going on around us, but some things haven't changed. Some things won't change. The spiritual realities of this world in which we live haven't changed one iota since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. God and Satan, good and evil, righteousness and sin, light and darkness remain unchanged. The authority of Jesus Christ hasn't changed one bit since the Son of God was raised by the power and the glory of the Father, was made and declared to be Lord and Christ, Master and King. There's still salvation in no one else. There's still no other name under heaven that's been given among men by which we must be saved other than the name of Jesus. That hasn't changed. Our deepest needs and pains and hurts and longings and dreams as humankind haven't changed. People are looking for a sense of connection and community and family. They're looking for real relationships and companionship. They're looking for a place to belong. I became a fan of the band Boston from the release of their first album in 1976. I'm looking into the faces of some of you who undoubtedly had that album, the self-titled debut album. Victor's just smiling really big back there. I know Victor had it. Probably still has the vinyl. But that was followed up, and I nearly wore that thing out on the turntable. And then 2 years later, in August of 1978, the second album, Don't Look Back, was released. And I started wearing that out, and then had the opportunity 2 months after its release, on October the 28th, 1978, 2 days before my 16th birthday, to go to the Murphy Center on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and see Boston. A solo Sammy Hagar was the opening act that night. That tells you how long that's been. But they only had 2 albums out, so they played every song off of both albums. It was just like listening to those being played on the turntable. And I was living in Australia at the time. Third Stage, the third album, came out. So I had just always loved and appreciated that band, and was just really saddened several years ago when I learned about the lead singer Brad Delp's untimely death at the age of 55, an age that's now in my rearview mirror. But it was March of 2007. He took his own life. And he left notes to family members, and he left a public note that merely included his name, Brad Delp, and the simple statement, "I am a lonely soul." And that was his message to the world. My name is Brad Delp. I'm a lonely soul. At age 55, he takes his own life. And that's heartbreakingly tragic. So many people feel that way. And it's heartbreaking. People that are looking for a place to belong. And Christ Church has a message that says you don't have to be alone. You don't have to be a lonely soul. I think even more so maybe in our day and age, men and women still feel that angst and despair when they've had their fill of everything that the world has to offer. Sometimes it takes a while to have your fill of all those different things, but ultimately they max out on experiential overload on the things of this world, whether it's money or power and authority or entertainment or sexual pleasure or leisure. And at the end of all that, they're sort of left like Solomon was, asking, is that it? Is there anything else? Is there anything more? Because for some reason, I don't feel filled. I don't feel satisfied. I know that something great is missing there, and what is so often missing is that real sense of community and family and connectedness and belonging. Starbucks has known that from the beginning, from 1971 when Starbucks was founded. A part of their philosophy of business and marketing has always been centered around this phrase, the third place. They want to be the third place. They recognize that nothing's going to replace, for most people, nothing's going to replace home. That's your first place. And just given the amount of time that you spend there and the effort and the energy and what you give of yourself at your workplace, that's the second place. They know you got to have a place to live. They know you got to work. So those are the first and second places. They just wanted to be the third place for people. And it's still on their website. By third place, they meant a place, an atmosphere where people had a sense of belonging, comfort, and connectedness with other people. You know, you just go to their website and you can find one of their pages, Starbucks Principles for Upholding the Third Place for our partners, our customers, and our communities. Since our founding in 1971, Starbucks has set out to be a different kind of company, one that puts people first, a third place where everyone is welcome, and we can gather as a community to share great coffee and deepen human connection. Everyone should feel welcome here. Every person who visits a Starbucks store is a customer, whether they make a purchase or not. Our customers are welcome to use the spaces we provide appropriately, including our cafes, patios, and restrooms. The existence of a welcoming public space is a shared responsibility. And again, we're making spiritual connections here, so I want you to key on this idea that this is a shared responsibility that we have. We expect everyone, this is still reading from their website, we expect everyone who uses the third place to promote a sense of community and treat each other with respect and dignity. Behaviors that make others feel unwelcome or unsafe undermine the sense of community that Starbucks tries to promote. and they have no place in our stores. We translate, they have no place in our church. Behaviors that make others feel unwelcome or unsafe. Those things that don't promote that sense of community and treating people with respect and with dignity. A business model of all things. A business model that's founded on a sense of belonging and comfort and connectedness with others. Obviously, spiritually speaking, that sense of connectedness is called the koinonia of Christ, the fellowship of Christ, commonality, sharing among God's saints. And that's a need that never goes away. It's a desire and a longing that never goes away in our lives. Just kind of looking at the youth group right now, how many of you, okay, this is participation on the first two rows here, and I'm going to need a show of hands. How many of you only remember being here as a church home? Your earliest memories, raise them nice and high. Okay? How many of you remember the first Sunday you came here? Nice and high. How many of you know you came there, but you can't quite remember that day? There's Cadence's hand. I was waiting on yours, Cadence. You were 4? Yeah, you don't remember that. But you add all those hands together, you guys remember what it was like to walk in here and not know anybody. You'd never been here before. You'd never been to a class. Didn't know any of these people. But you come here, and maybe this was the third or fourth or fifth congregation that you had visited in a row on consecutive weeks, and you were looking for a place to belong. You were looking for a place to connect. There are young professionals who move halfway across the country to this area after finishing school. 13 years of kindergarten through high school, and then maybe 4 years of college, a couple of years of graduate school, get a job, move here, half a world away from everybody they've ever known. And they're looking for a place to belong. A young couple that's still in the early stages of learning what it means to be married, and now the stakes have been raised because they're also simultaneously learning what it means to be parents and to raise a child or raise children. And that's just at home, the things that they're grappling with. And at work, management is sending signals, sometimes mixed signals, about the future of your department. This time of year, the kids can't seem to get well and stay well, and nerves are starting to frazzle and fray, and you need a refuge. You need a place where you feel like you belong. There are couples adjusting to the empty nest and are dealing with this question, now that my kids are grown and on their own, have I accomplished my life's work? Is there anything left? Anything valuable and worthwhile left to accomplish? Or a dear older sister in Christ who's learning how to adjust to life without her companion of over 50 years who recently passed away. That person that's always been sitting to their right or to their left in assemblies like this, and now that seat is empty. That woman, that man is looking for a place to belong. And regardless of where you are in life, when you leave a church home that you've been connected with for a long time, like Jack and Ethel, I know you were wanting to feel like you belong here. And Paul and Emily and Marcia Burnett, same thing. Leaving a long time church home and coming to a new place. There's that desire to belong. Psalm 68, 5 and 6, a father of the fatherless and a judge for the widows is God in his holy habitation. God makes a home for the lonely. He leads out the prisoners into prosperity. The NIV translates that verse, he sets the lonely in families. So we go back to that text in Matthew chapter 12. Jesus identifies his true brothers and sisters and mother. It is wonderful how that story comes full circle, and those closest to him physically ultimately come to believe and become a part of that spiritual family. We find Mary at the cross. We find Mary in the upper room after the ascension of Jesus, and his brothers are there. And one of those brothers, James, is going to become a pillar of the Jerusalem church, and he's going to write a letter that we're going to start studying in the parlor next Sunday morning. And another one of his brothers, Jude, wrote a letter that's in our New Testaments. And as wonderful and as God ordained as physical families are, Jesus says there's something deeper, there's something stronger, something more lasting. And that's the sense of family and connectedness that we want you to feel at the Broken Arrow Church. We want you to feel like you're just not a part of the church, you're a part of this church family, and a vital part of its life. And if for whatever reason you don't have that sense, you don't have that feeling, you don't have that confidence, then let us help you gain that sense and that feeling. Talk to one of the shepherds or all of the shepherds. Talk to me or to Scott or to Kevin, to our deacons, our ministry leaders, new life group leaders that'll be forming very, very soon. And we'll work together in making sure that all of us feel that sense of family, that sense of connectedness. And by all means, if there's some immediate need that you need care and attention and support for, we ask that you make that known even now as we're standing and singing together.